All right, guys, Bassmaster Classic week. Pilot Point, Texas, Lake Lay Roberts. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Ben Milliken and what's been going on. Shots fired. Oh, my God. This stuff just doesn't ever end. But we're really going to talk about Bass in the context of Ben Milliken, but Bass going into Bassmaster Classic and why this is probably the most important classic that this new ownership group has had since 2017. Okay? Why this Bassmaster Classic has to go off without a hitch. Bass has never been in such a precarious position as it is today. It's basically now being flanked, right? I mean, Bass has been a premier growing up, all of us. Bass has been a premier professional bass fishing organization. But it's not the same organization that it was, guys. And I think if you're my age, if you're in your 50s, you completely understand what I'm talking about. If you're younger and you didn't go to classics in the 80s and the 90s, and I understand things change and we all have to evolve, but I don't really think Bass has really evolved. I think it's devolved. I think it's actually going backwards. I don't think it's going forwards. And everything over the last few years has told you that it is not about the fish, okay? It is not about the anglers. The issues beset Bass are all about management. It is all about management. It is a business. We don't consider it to be a business for the most part, and that's probably on us because a lot of people don't, other than a few channels, don't really approach Bass from a business perspective. That's what I have always tried to do the last 2 years here on YouTube. There are a few other podcasters. And right now, Bass has a media problem. It has a media problem because it's self-contained and controlling, okay? It's not covered by real media, okay? And I don't profess to be real media. I don't profess to be, a journalist. I don't profess to be those things, okay? I just profess to be a schmuck on YouTube who cares about fishing, cares about the industry, has followed the industry and worked in the industry my entire life in one way or another. This is just the latest iteration of YouTube since YouTube has come on and being content and doing content stuff. But years and years and decades past being in the industry, and I've just always enjoyed it like most people, as the escape that it always is. Fishing is something that a lot of us value as a getaway. It's, we see it as something completely different than we do other sports. It's not micromanaged by the mainstream legacy media. You don't see, a lot of people thought that things would change, in 2000, I want to say 2010, but with the transition to a more fishing-centric ownership. Remember, ESPN had owned Bass since 2001, and it went through a decade of where things were run a lot different, okay? There was a little bit more oversight. There was a little bit more because ESPN obviously has a sports media background from all the other sports, and the coverage was completely different back then than it is today. Today, there is no criticisms. There is no opposition. There is no room for any of that in Bass, okay? And let me just shout this out real quick. Everything that I say in this video today and future videos when I cover Bass is my opinion, not my wife's, okay? So just make sure that you only hold me accountable for my opinion and the things that I say about Bass and not hold my wife accountable, okay? Do you guys understand how ridiculous that sounds? Because that's Bass. Bass has directed wives of anglers, okay? This management team has directed a directive to the wives of all of the anglers fishing on the Bassmaster Elite Series and really other series that toe the line because anything that you say on social media will be held against your husband. Think about that. Think about how absurd that is for an organization that's heavily rooted in the South, that's heavily rooted in wrap themselves in the flag all of the time, always saluting the veterans. Well, what do you think those veterans are fighting for, Bass? They're fighting for free speech. They're fighting for not being held guilty by association. And that's what Bass stands for today. You will see anglers rooming with other anglers who fail polygraphs getting polygraphed. That's guilty by association. Do you know they've polygraphed more anglers already? 7, 8 anglers an event already in 2025 to try and push back against the growing narrative that exists on social media that everything's rigged. Okay? And how they've had to go about selecting those polygraphs. But at the end of the day, nobody has any faith in those polygraphs. Nobody. Nobody that you talk to on the street believes a polygraph. If you support an angler and they fail a polygraph, your allegiance to the angler is like, that polygraph's rigged. That polygraph's crap. Right? Now, if someone that you don't like in Bass fails a polygraph, oh, polygraphs, man, he failed a polygraph. Go on social media and Facebook and look at all that crap. Okay? That's why I highly recommend that anybody watching this video who's tired of that bullshit, get off Meta. Get off Facebook. Because it's not productive. It's not productive. And here's why. You basically on social media for fishing now. Here's some prime examples. I just released a video a few weeks ago about Googan Squad. About Googan. I don't do videos about Googan. I don't throw Googan baits on videos and do, and push Googan stuff. And I've never done that in the 2 years plus I've been on YouTube. I've never done that. I like the story. I think the story as a disruptor is a great story. They rocked the fishing world. Okay? In this very same way, when MLF bought FLW, rocked the fishing world. Okay? I like that. Because otherwise you get complacent. Okay? But on social media, like on Meta, you're either a fanboy or a hater. There's no middle ground. No one wants to if you love Googan and you're critical of Googan, you're a hater. If you love Ben Milliken and you're critical of Ben Milliken, like I have been, for how he has handled his situation facing the lawsuit coming in August. He'll probably be in court in August. Okay? By the likes of it. And he's probably going to get found guilty, guys. He probably is. It's probably 80-20 that he's going to be found guilty. Because he is guilty. Okay? He's guilty. He's guilty of fishing without a license, which he's already paid that fine. So he's already admitted that. He didn't contest that. Okay? And he's guilty of fraud. Because he again, signed paperwork that declared his intentionality that he caught the fish with an actual valid license and legally and all that stuff, and he knew that he didn't, and he signed it, and he submitted it to the state. Okay? Again, it's just a matter of what the penalties are going to be, in my opinion. He's going to lose his fishing license for a year, and he's probably also going to lose his fishing license in Louisiana and all the reciprocal states that have that relationship, and that's what's going to happen. Okay? Don't be shocked by it when it happens, okay? Now, he could still plea, do something, community service, whatever they could work out between now and August. We'll see what happens. But on the basis of what we have, okay, it's going to be all about butisms. Like, yeah, I'm guilty, but, and that's what that's going to be. But if you make those statements, you're a hater, okay? But if you are, totally in the Ben Milliken camp, and, who cares about him fishing without a license? Or, he's innocent. They're just trying to go after him. They're just targeting my boy Ben. If you're that, then the other side thinks you're a fanboy. There's no common ground because there's no mediator in any of this. Have you heard Bass say anything about Ben Milliken? A star that they like to promote, okay? A star, all right, that they like to promote, all right? Have they had any comment whatsoever about the issues that he faces? Of course not. Because it's not in their interest. Because if you deep dive into it, all of the things that are happening right now that Bass is trying to keep at bay is happening on it's happening on YouTube. There are dozens of podcasters now who are done playing the game that Bass has been playing since 2017. Okay? And that is when Anderson Media took over Bass. You got to remember that. Most people are not familiar with the ownership trajectory of Bass. They're not. And they don't think about, back in the day. Well, back in the day, it was run by Ray Scott. It was run by anglers. It was run by an angler-centric experience up until 1986. Okay? And then, Ray sold Bass in 1986 to an investment group. Okay? And then that was the first shot, right? Change is coming. Okay? Again, first mover, unbelievable in the 80s, right? Again, 2001. What happens in 2001? ESPN buys Bass, okay, from the investment group. So Bass has changed hands now twice in about 14 years. So you got a decade in there of the 90s where it was run by the investment group. Before, and up until 1986, it was run by Ray Scott. Rather effectively. Do you remember any of this crap? Do you remember? Now, I get it. Social media has compounded everything. But do you remember remotely anything rising to the level of the DQs and all the stuff that we've had? Now, people will say, well, Jay, a lot of cheating went on back then. It just didn't get... And that could be true. That could be true. So in 2010, all right, ESPN announces it's getting out of the fishing business. Why did it do that? Guys, Bass faces the same problem today, 15, years later. Right? It's hard to make money in fishing. Right? It really is. And they're a business. It's a business. It's a business whose books you don't see. So the only way you can discern the trajectory of Bass is on the periphery. Sponsors. What's happening with the movement of sponsors, right? What is going on with those things, with sponsors? Well, what's happened? Not only has Bass been sold, sold in 1986, sold in 2001, sold in 2010, sold again in 2017. Okay? A company, investor groups, buyers realize after about a decade that they can't make it work. Bass is facing that problem right now today, 2025, with this Bassmaster Classic. It has to go off without a hitch. If it does not, it's done. It is. How do you know? Look at sponsors, okay? When you're constantly turning over your sponsors in an event series or organization, that signals to everybody there's a problem. Meaning this. If you had a lottery number, okay? You got a lottery number that you play. It's your birth date, your wedding date, your wife's birth date, your kid's birth dates, whatever it is. And it wins. It wins, it wins, it wins, it just keeps winning. You going to change that number? No. You're going to keep playing that number. Now apply that to sponsors. If sponsors are winning and winning and winning and getting an ROI, a return on their investment that they're making into Bass, they will keep making that investment every contract renewal. Sponsors aren't doing that anymore. Look how many sponsors Anderson Media Corp has gone through for Bass since 2017. Again, COVID, pandemic, understandable, okay? Understandable. There were a lot of things in that period that make it a challenging environment, in fairness to Anderson Media and in fairness to Bass. But coming out of it, what have they done? They've alienated viewers. They've alienated people my age that have supported Bass their entire lives by the things that they have done and the positions they have taken and the rules modifications and the selective enforcement of said rules, okay? It's not just forward-facing sonar, guys. It's not. That's part of a collective, disconnect from fans. And if you want a good indication of that, and again, it could still be a recovering thing coming out of COVID, but the reality of it is if you go back and you look at the original drone shots, the beginning of drone technology, which really first obviously began with the military and then hit the media before it became, any Joe could have a drone. Go back and look at those shots of previous events before 2017 for Bass, or aerial shots of how many people came to Bass Elite Series events in person to watch weigh-ins. You're not going to see very many drone footages anymore, except for maybe Knoxville Bassmaster last year, because that blew it up. Okay? That was a great, great event. And kind of on the cusp of the beginning of what we've seen for the last year, where it's just gone down. They have not been able to get back to that level of enthusiasm. The anglers have been upset. The fans have been upset. The sponsors have been upset. Okay? This is just what's happening. Okay? The viewership is down on Fox Sports. Don't listen to anything that they tell you, because it's not fact checkable, except when it is. And Fox releases its views. And most people would be shocked to know that girls college softball on Fox Sports 1 gets more views than bass fishing. Okay? Decade ago would not have been the case. All right? You go back and look at the views that ESPN had before it started to decline, okay, in bass fishing. All right? Challenging environment for sure. How you react to that environment is you tell anglers' wives that whatever they say on social media, you're going to punish their husbands' careers. That's your response. Okay? And so, again, DQs, selective enforcement, and not only that, selective penalties. Okay? Again, it just fuels the narrative that everybody's always thought about fishing, that it's a good old boy network, and it's more about who you know, not what you do or how you perform, or if you get out of line and you raise any criticisms, you become targeted. Okay? And that's where Bass has gotten to. It really has. Now, a lot's coming down on this tournament, and you've got some real dynamics working now. Shots taken by Ben Milliken to the Zaldanes, okay? You can go on other podcasters and see, okay, the actual receipts of messages, of screenshots that are bouncing around social media now. Bass can't control that. Bass is not out in front of that. You look at what happened to this, the Bilge podcast. Start asking some questions. Right? Like, wait, what? Like, what happened to that? That podcast was getting more views than Bassmaster. Okay? And suddenly their sponsors up and pull the plug? Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Kind of makes you wonder what the conversations were between Bass and Trait Zaldane that made them kind of like just be, for most part for 2025, been pretty silent, no longer taking the RV on the road to Bass events to speak with anglers at the event sites, now basically having to run their podcast from their home. Interesting dynamic. How did that all come about? I'm sure we're going to learn a little bit more. The shots taken by Ben Milliken at the Zaldanes, calling them scumbags. We're going to learn a little bit more about that. Meanwhile, the Classic is in Texas, where it's pretty much the only place in the country where Ben Milliken actually performs well, like relative to his peers, okay? You got to remember, Okay? And then he takes a shot. He takes a shot at Texas, where he lives, with his new hashtag for Nebraska, not Texas. Like, some people will call that genius. I probably would on some level. Marketing, strategy, whatever you want to get views. But my knock on Milliken is why are you knocking on everybody else on YouTube trying to do the same thing? If everybody on YouTube is trying to get clicks and trying to get views and trying to get all that stuff, that's exactly what Ben Milliken's been doing for years, guys. I prefer the old Ben Milliken. I prefer the Ben Milliken who was teaching and educating people on swim baits, how to throw swim baits effectively when swim baits were coming on brand new, like gaining a lot of traction, and most people on the East Coast had no idea what freaking swim baits that were being thrown in Texas and California on the Delta and places like that. People didn't have any idea. He was a great resource for all that. But now, since he's joined the Elite Series, and let me tell you something, guys, this is probably his last year on the Elite Series. Mark my words. And I got a pretty good rating by a lot of this stuff. I don't think he's going to be back on the Elite Series. Watch his videos. Without throwing Bass under the bus, he's throwing Bass under the bus. And what does Bass do? They're so dysfunctional. They make him an advisor. They put him on the advisory board, an angler advisor to them on how they should run their events. Ben Milliken is probably the last person on the planet at this right now today that probably should be involved in that, right? In terms of a Bassmaster Elite Series. Like, he's been on the series for a blink, right? Like, I'm sorry, but like, think about locker room stuff. When rookies come into the locker room, you always hear about that in the NFL and all these professional teams. You got to earn it, man. You got to earn it. Like, you're making it an important advisory board, right? And what does Bass do? Right? They picked the guy who finished 27th or 28th in the year in standings, who basically didn't do well outside of Texas, like in terms of, and like, it's like, wait, what? And you got guys that have been involved with Bass for 50. But again, a lot of those people were involved prior to 2017, prior to Anderson Media Corp taking over Bass. And a lot of people have made that call, like they want to move off of the anglers who were there before, because the things just aren't nearly as good as they were before. And they're tired of hearing about it. Because there's a lot of disgruntled anglers behind the scenes complaining about a lot of things, not just about their wives not being able to speak, which I think is absolutely absurd, okay, and stupid to pick fights with anglers. And the thing about it, though, my biggest thing for Bass is they're lucky. They're lucky that there's no real, like, unity among the anglers. They are lucky. Because the anglers haven't had their great awakening yet, that without them, there is no Bass, okay? And if they were unified and they said, you know what? Bullshit. First of all, we don't work for you, okay? Look at that dichotomy of Bass will always make sure that they remind the anglers that they're independent contractors, okay? Which means they don't work for Bass, right? And that they're their own brands, okay? They're their own brands, right? Well, if they're their own brands, okay, then let's examine how Bass perceives as a business the role of working in partnership with other brands. Because they completely have stated that the anglers are their own brands. Well, so is Under Armour. Okay? That's a brand. Yamaha's a brand, right? Those are brands, okay? But you treat different brands differently, right? Clearly. And so you're not really partnering with the angler brands, right? But on the same token, you want to treat them like employees when they're not employees. You want to tell your employee that his wife needs to shut up on podcasts and to stop being as critical. You want to tell podcasters that be very careful or else. Because podcasters, we're not independent contractors and we're not employees of Bass either. Okay? So they don't really have any control over coverage, whether it be a podcaster, whether it be media, whether it be journalism, whether it be bloggers, whether it be Substackers. Some of the greatest content there is in bass fishing is on Substack, guys. It's not on Meta. It's not on Facebook. It's not on Instagram. If you really care about what's going on in the industry and you really care about what really is happening behind the closed doors of bass, go on Substack and read. Okay? Or watch the new podcast forums on Substack. Because it's not Facebook. It's not a clown show. It's real. It's reality. So when one morning you wake up and you find out, oh wow. Everybody thinks it was MLF when MLF in 2019 bought FLW and anglers began to make some lateral moves from Bass to MLF or MLF to Bass. That was the big earth-shattering. No, the real earth-shattering thing was in 2017 when the Anderson Media Group bought Bass. That was a hell of a lot more, in terms of what the results would be than MLF and FLW. We talk about MLF and FLW all the time because we always want to put things about competitor, mono, which is better, blah, 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 right? But in reality, it was the sale of Bass in 2017 that has had the ripple effect because it's a management issue. Okay, it is. Everything stems from how everything is managed, right? How are the anglers managed? Okay, at some point, we need to get past this whole thing that anglers are their own brands. We really do, guys. Because I don't think anglers want to wake up one morning and they get a letter in the mail that goes from their state that says, oh, by the way, since you're now a brand, we're now going to tax you, not at the individual tax rate of a citizen, we're going to tax you like we tax businesses. How many anglers are going to be down for that? So they need to be real careful about this whole, my brand. Okay, because brands are associated with businesses. Okay, not people. That's a whole social media, blow up mental health problem where people think that they have brands. Okay, and they've made themselves to believe, and social media platforms have exploited it into making people believe they're a brand or they're an influencer or whatever. It's not real. It becomes real when the government decides to tax you as a business. Because if that's what you are, if you're a brand and you're not just an angler, you don't get the individual no income tax in Texas or Florida or wherever. We can tax you now 30% or actually 15%. That's business. Right? People are going to be jumping right back to being an individual real quick. But here's the thing, though. If you're Bass and you want to partner with your brands, why don't you partner with anglers? See, what's going to happen is, what you've noticed this morning, for example, the Pro-Am went down. Eagle Rock, is that what it's called? I think, on a lake in Texas, right? At 9 o'clock, there were 250 people watching the live stream of the Pro-Am. The launch and Mercer and it was on Bassmaster Live. Bassmaster Live on YouTube. 250 people were on there on live watching that. That's a problem. Now, they'll probably get a couple thousand views over the course of the day and then tomorrow, people who are at work or in the morning or getting their kids off to school and all that stuff. I understand that, okay? But I'm just saying, now compare that to, say, a Matt Robertson video on Okeechobee and St. John's when he's doing live streams from the water and he gets 13, 14, and 15,000 views. The anglers are getting more views than Bassmaster's coverage. Bassmaster is paying people hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover the events for Bassmaster YouTube and their Bassmaster.com channel. But yet the anglers themselves, who are brands, are live streaming from the water and getting 3, 4, 5, 10, sometimes 20 times the number of streaming views. Why is that? It's because we as fans have more faith in the angler than we do Bass. We don't believe what Bass is putting out. We don't. That's the fact of the matter is, and that's the ship that they need to right. They had better hope that there's no controversy But there already is. They just haven't covered it up. Kenny has always said this, MLF to MLF and stuff like that it's the things we don't talk about that we really should be talking about. Right? How is it that you can have a competitor be competing on Friday in the Bassmaster Classic that clearly fished on that lake reportedly without a license last fall? How do you rationalize that to the public? That an individual admits that his license expired on a certain date. He didn't know it, fairness to him. He admits that it expired in August of last year and yet was on lakes, pre-fishing lakes for Bassmaster Elite Series and the Bassmaster Classic without a valid license, and yet he still gets to fish in the Classic. I'm just saying, some people won't care about that. Some people just put, like I said before, if you're an MFer, you are down with you're down with the sickness, right? It's I don't care about that. It doesn't matter. Licenses, none of us should have to have licenses. Yeah, but we do, because that's the law. And Bass is supposed to enforce rules, right? Okay, and the guy's been pinched, so he's already been arrested and booked and is going to, you know what I mean? And it's they got nothing to say about it. They got nothing to say about it because, again, they don't want to say anything about it. They don't want to draw your attention to the matter that the guy fished for 5 or 6 months reportedly without a license until he bought the license on February 5th. So he fished from September to February, and all of his content, he fished Lake Fork, okay? Which there was an event at the end of the month in February. It's all over social media. He's holding up tanks that he caught pre-fishing for a Bassmaster Elite Series event in 2024 that he caught without a license. Bass doesn't want to touch any of that. That's why they aren't credible. They're not credible. They haven't even sanctioned him at all, knowing what they know. And that's why you've got people who have podcasts that are affiliated with Bass, meaning their husbands are in Bass, that fish in events, that have been suddenly very, very quiet because the hammer, reportedly, behind the scenes has been dropped. You are not to do these things. Whether that's true or not, we're about ready to find out this season coming up on who's covering Bass objectively and who's just shilling for Bass. Okay? Because behind the scenes, there are already reports of people being retaliated against. Okay? And there are a number of ways. There are people who believe that Matt Herron was retaliated against. Okay? There are people who believe that. Okay? Based on what they know. There are anglers who believe that, who have communicated to podcasters and channels like my own that they believe he was targeted. There are people who believe that Scott Martin is a chronic offender of rules, okay? That actually his peers that have reached out to other podcasters and this channel, about that situation, okay? Because independence means independence. Bass is not independent. Bass is not objective. Bass is a business who is set on making money. Bass is an investment for Anderson Media Corp. That is an investment for them. Okay, they can ill afford for there to be repeated, continually black eyes impacting that business. They certainly don't want people to draw attention to it. They certainly don't want to be addressing these things, but it's all going to come to fruition at some point now with the excessive number of DQs that some will claim, well, Bass is finally doing something, right? But what are they really doing? Right? It backfires. Now everybody is tired of the DQs already. It's been 2 events. If someone gets DQ'd in the Bassmaster Classic, right? What happens on Friday, guys? When Bass has to make the decision of Anderson Media and Bass Management has to make the most important decision since 2017, since when Anderson Media bought Bass. In 8 years, this is the most important decision they're going to have to make, and it involves what? Wind. They're projecting 15 to 18 mile an hour winds on Lake Roberts. 25 to 30 miles per hour wind gusts today. Okay, it's Wednesday. 2 days, everything could change. But if things stay the same, they're going to have to make a call in which they may have to postpone 1 day of the Bassmaster Classic. Can anybody remember a time in history where that has happened? I can't. I really can't. I mean, maybe, I don't know if it's happened. I can't remember it happening. Okay? Doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I just can't remember it ever happening. Okay? But that's where we are again. Remember last month in Texas? Postponements? Doesn't matter whether it's Bassmaster or MLF. They want to kick the season off early. They want to get there, and the weather's nice in Florida and Texas. Texas has got wind. January, February, March. Chronic wind. Crazy wind all the time. Unpredictable. And you run that risk. And they scheduled the Classic back in Texas again. And they're running that risk. Okay? And so, this is the most important decision. Probably, even more than forward-facing sonar, in my opinion. Okay? Because I always thought forward-facing sonar was baked in. But, I'm just telling you, they postpone on Friday. From a business perspective, they don't want to postpone a day in the Bassmaster Classic. That loses them views. That loses them credibility. That loses them, their partners who have put into the Classic expecting it to be, 3 days and 4 days of just like crazy bass fest, attracting eyeballs, engaging with customers and fans and all that stuff. You lose a day. Again, this is why I'm saying this is the most important event in the history of Anderson Media Corp owning Bassmaster right now in 2025. Now, I know a lot of people are like, man, come on, Jay, you're overreacting. Maybe. You might be right. I could be completely wrong on this. But we're going to see how it works out. Okay? We're going to see how this event goes down and run. It's not just the weather. This event has to go off without a hitch. There can't be any drama. It's just got to be freaking fishing. Best fishing in the world. The top, most well-known and most, I dare say, respected, okay, professional fishing organization in the country. Historically, the Bassmaster Classic is the epitome of bass fishing, okay? It has to go off without a hitch. If it doesn't, Bassmaster is now flanked. They are getting chewed at the margins. MLF has been righting its ship slowly but surely over the last 2 years. Okay, slowly. NPFL is beginning to make waves. Okay? Expect anglers to be moving away from bass, and more anglers who aren't making the Elite Series from the Bassmaster Opens to come into the NPFL, which will then shrink the ranks of the Bassmaster Opens, which are already shrinking. And then you've got no co-anglers, that whole debate of no co-anglers across the fishing community, okay? The ludicrous, stupid debate that is, okay? Makes zero sense because boat companies want to market boats to who? Co-anglers. Right? So you remove that demographic from the fishing community tournament level at the high level. That's like a stupid move. But, okay. I understand it. They can get rid of the co-anglers and they can charge the boaters more and everything will be the same and again, and then you're going to get to 3 or 4 years down the line, and you're going to see that the growth of the sport has continued to decline. You're going to see sponsors pull out of the sport, And then you're finally going to get what is bound to happen. One or two of these trails absolutely dissipating before your eyes. And a lot of people think it's going to be MLF or MPFL. I don't. I think it's going to be Bass. I think either Bass folds and mergers with somebody else out of necessity, or they get sold again on the cheap to someone who actually understands the market. Okay? That's not, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down like we've seen the last couple years. And again, COVID, pandemic, big effect, challenging environment for businesses. But you got to compete on social media. You got to compete on YouTube. You got to compete on the internet with your website. You've got to compete for anglers. You've got to compete for anglers. You've got to be the destination that anglers want to get to. You've got to do all your PR. You've got to be able to hold every single angler accountable in the same way. You've got to be able to take stands on these positions and to generate confidence in us as fans that we believe in Bass again. Okay? Nobody does. If you ask them in private, they don't. People don't have faith in it anymore. And that is what's sad. Especially if you're older generation. If you're above 50 years old and you talk to people in that demographic, okay, that fish all the time, that probably spend a lot more money than you would think. Now, a lot of retired people spend a lot of money on fishing trips and a lot of money on gear and a lot of money on all that stuff. Okay? Like, I'm just saying, you talk to those people, they're not watching anymore. They're not. You know what I mean? You have 4-day events. What is that shit? You have 4 days, 5 days. Like what? That model hasn't been working. It's costing the organizations more money than they're generating. It is, right? Then you've got championship day on Saturday. If you have championship day on days where the fan base or the viewer base actually has events of their own because they're anglers and they compete at the club level. Or they compete, whatever. Or maybe there's a BFL event for MLF. And you know what I'm saying? And you've got like people like going, the championship day for the freaking Elite Series event is on the same day. It doesn't make any sense. Anglers complain about boaters and boater traffic. Well, when's all the boater traffic? Saturday, Sunday, right? Like, again, wake up to the reality of where are you going to reach the more fans? Where are you going to reach? Fans aren't coming to the venue anymore. The logic was having a Saturday championship or a Sunday championship and having a weigh-in. People are off on the weekends. They work 9 to 5. They're off. Their kids are out of school. They could come out and come watch the weigh-in and all that stuff. Well, we're not there anymore, guys. Like, we're not there anymore. God, people are watching. You put it online. People are watching online, just like people are watching movies at home and not going to the movies. Okay, they've got streaming services. You're putting it on streaming. Why are you not partnering with a streaming company? Why are you not then partnering with the anglers instead of the anglers having live streams that compete directly against Bass? Bass could pay the angler that they have a camera in the boat. That's the live stream on the Bass platform, and they actually provide incentive for the angler that if they get into the top 10, there's going to be a boat there, and they're going to be compensated for the camera in the boat because that camera is going to be feeding live on YouTube and on the Bassmaster channel. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure this stuff out. I just kind of feel like these people are clueless about the reality. Why are you not allowing anglers to have subscriptions? Why would you not take that camera in the boat, take the camera in the boat, put a camera in the boat for the top anglers, let them stream to their platforms, okay? Also advertising Bass's sponsors for the event as well as their own sponsors, okay, throughout the live stream and all the graphics on the screen and the commercials that pop up and all that stuff, and compensate the angler. Partner with the angler, right? Or allow the angler to have a subscription with Bass, meaning on the Bass website, through Bass Streaming, you can subscribe to the Swindle channel, the Robertson channel, the Milliken channel, the Livesey channel, the Zaldane channel, where it's $25 or whatever a month, and you get all of the live feeds for that angler, the angler that you want to see. You want to pick the angler who you want to follow every day during the Bassmaster Classic, and you're willing to pay $25 for it. Who's not going to do that? I would pay $25 to follow my fantasy picks that I picked for the Bassmaster Classic. Okay, I would do that. Would you? Are they offering you that? Have they even thought to offer you that? No. Have they ever thought to offer premium level directed strategic content like that, where you can support your angler how you want to support your angler? And then think about it, man. If you're a Ben Milliken, okay, if you're a Chris Zaldane, if you're someone who's got 10,000, 20,000 people willing to pay $25 to watch their live streaming during Bassmaster Elite Series events all season or whatever, or just at the Classic or whatever, do the math. You don't have an entry fee problem, boys. Entry fee problem's gone away. The fans paid for it. It doesn't take a genius to figure this stuff out. It really doesn't. So that's why I question someone with a somewhat business acumen, okay, who's run businesses, who's owned businesses, who's sold businesses, who's invested in business, who's invested in things, okay? Why are these conversations not happening? Right? Again, ask Bass. Instead, Bass is going to do what it always has done, and it's going to go negative and retaliate against anglers for speaking out, against podcasters for speaking out, because they want to control the narratives, because there is no media. There is no major media sports company in America that is focused on bass fishing, who's going to focus and put a microphone or put a camera in an angler's face and ask them about what they feel about this person or that person or this rule or that rule or whatever. And the anglers are like, I'm sorry, I can't speak with you about that. I'm going to have to cut you off right there. I'm sorry. The rules don't allow me to speak to you about that. Right? That's the current world we live in, where anglers can't talk to a media. They really can't. What would the media ask them? I mean, like, where'd you fish? How'd you fish? You know, how did you know to go to that spot? Blah, 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 blah. But they're not going to, no. You know? Or the media guy's like, oh, well, I heard they were catching them in the freaking on the flats and in the grass and Okeechobee. I can't. That's just what it is. It's ridiculous. I mean, everybody knows anglers are getting information. Can we just stop? Can we just stop? And that's the world we live in. AI's coming, right? Run me a program, right? Like, again, it's absurd, but that's where we're at. So this is what I'm saying, guys. Bassmaster Classic, I'm excited. Obviously, I'm not there this year. Conscious decision on my part, right? Again, cost. Flying to Texas, staying for 3 or 4 days, hotel room, food, lodging, all of that for what? For the current state of bass? No. Now, not like Knoxville. Knoxville is a lot closer. Knoxville, Tennessee is a lot closer to where I am. And a lot cheaper, believe it or not, than Texas and Tennessee, for a lot of things. But really, it's about the state of bass right now. The things that they're doing, things that are going to come out. Things are going to come out in the next couple of weeks about bass that is going to shock you. Like, you're going to be like, what? They did what? Right? Okay. Right? I'm like, no, you're not getting my dollar. You're not getting my money. This time. Sorry, Texas. When you got a guy in Texas, moved to Texas to exploit Texas lakes for his own content purposes, whatever, alienates Texas residents, and the locals, always just like picking at the locals in stuff with the gods, and then goes on a hashtag for Nebraska, not Texas, and you live in Texas campaign? Like, again, like what? Like, again, grow up. Right? You know what I mean? Your life is not YouTube. And if your life is YouTube, You got a bigger problem than you do the other 100 plus whatever anglers there are in the Elite Series that you got to compete against. If that's your mindset, grow up. Okay, you don't belong on a professional circuit if that is your mindset, because you're not a professional. Because you haven't really been behaving like a professional, and kids are looking up. Okay, I could say that. I got my next Ben Milliken video is probably going to piss a lot of people off. But when you got kids who are walking around talking about how they don't have to follow the rules and they don't have to get licenses and they can do whatever. I'm talking about 18. I'm talking about people that you have to get a lot. Not 13, 14, 15, 16. I'm talking about 18-year-olds. Like, dude, you're illegal. You're an adult now, man. No, Milliken says we don't need licenses. What? Say what? Yeah, like, I mean, Ben Milliken was fishing without a license. It's not that big of a deal. Well, okay. Maybe Texas needs to make it a big deal. So the message can get sent to future generations that there are things you do and things you don't do. And if you're a professional, you need to have integrity. And if you don't have integrity, then it should be Bass's responsibility to weed you out. Okay? Because Bass is a brand and Bass is a business that it needs to protect. And there's always a downside. Sure, there's an upside. There's also a downside to certain things. And right now, we're seeing the downside happening and hitting Bass over its head repeatedly over the last 8 to 10 months. And they just have not been able to get out in front of it. And this classic has got to go off without a hitch. Or I'm telling you, Bass is going to be in for a lot of trouble in the coming year. All right, guys. I'll see you next time. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this content. Always send me your suggestions or anything you want me to cover, or if you got some news or whatever from your local part of the country that's, that you feel like needs to be covered or talked about or whatever, just hit me up. Enjoy it. Again, enjoy the classic. I'm not a hater. I just like to keep it real. Okay? I just like to keep it real and keep you guys informed as to some of the things that are developing. So you're not blindsided when shit hits the fan, because it's about to hit the fan.